Arundhathi Subramaniam is one of the brightest stars in the sky of contemporary Indian writing in English. She is a poet, a biographer, an editor, a writer of non-fictional prose, and above all, a seeker of truth, of spiritual truth. She has collected numerous awards from all over the world, including the Sahitya Academy Award for the year 2020. The poem has a very appropriate title. Not merely a very appropriate title, but also a very interesting title, and perhaps also a very original title, When Landscape Becomes Woman. The poem tells the story of an 8-year-old girl who peeps through a keyhole into the drawing room of her own house one night in order to see her mother. And she sees her mother in a dramatically new light. Of course, the girl has all along known her mother. She says that she knows her mother better than she knows herself. But that night, she sees her mother in a new light, from a new perspective. And she sees her mother not as a mother, but rather as a woman. Though the poet does not specify it, there is perhaps the suggestion that the daughter sees the mother as a woman and as a sexual being, taking part in a party. And the party is, in all likelihood, a mixed party, a party in which both men and women participate. When landscape becomes woman, landscape is everything that you see. Landscape is all the visible features of the land, the mountains, the rivers, the forests, and it is appreciated from the aesthetic angle. And a landscape is said to be aesthetically appealing when all its parts integrate into one to form one unit. When landscape becomes woman, the girl looks through the keyhole, peeps through the keyhole, and appreciates what she sees as if it were a landscape. But it is not a landscape, it is a mother. It is not her mother, but it is a woman. And I think there is the hidden suggestion that all the aspects of the person, of the woman, integrated perfectly to form a unit. There was a very appealing harmony about the woman, and the woman could be appreciated as if she were a landscape. And the girl of 8, the daughter, feels that she is able to look at the woman and appreciate her from an aesthetic angle as if she were a landscape. In fact, she is not a mother. She is not the girl's mother. She is not the geography, but the landscape. When landscape becomes woman, the poem narrates the experience of an 8-year-old girl who is carried away by the landscape that she sees through a keyhole, through the keyhole, which gives her an opportunity to see a party in progress in the drawing room of her own house, and the landscape is a woman. In fact, her own mother, whom she now realizes is a woman rather than a mother, a sexual being rather than a mother. The great lesson that the poem conveys, in particular through its title, is that mothers are women, but it takes some time for daughters to realize this great truth. The poet has provided the piece with a very carefully crafted opening. I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole. 2 lines forming a stanza. What is the punctuation at the end of the second line, at the end of the stanza? There is no punctuation. I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole. An opening designed to rouse the curiosity of the reader. A girl of 8 peeping through a keyhole. Has she already become a voyeur? There is certainly something voyeuristic about the whole exercise. The speaker at the age of 8 looking not through a doorway, not through a window, but through a keyhole. What does she see? What does the little girl see? The poet refuses to explain, at least within the context of the first stanza, within the ambit of the first stanza. And we are not given a clue regarding the room or the place which she saw. Did the girl see something which she should not have seen? The reader is made eager to know what happened, to know the nature of the vision that the girl of 8 had when she peeped through the keyhole. And the reader cannot restrain himself from reading the lines that follow. We now move to the second stanza. The suspense created by the opening stanza is exploded, is shattered. The sense of expectation generated by the first stanza is effectively responded to when we reach the second stanza. And saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari. Thank God, the girl has peeped only into the drawing room, not into any other room. I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole and saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari. A brilliant exemplification of the use of the figure of speech called enjambment. As I pointed out, the punctuation at the end of the second line, at the end of the first stanza, there is no punctuation. The punctuation is that there is no punctuation. As a result, though in a technical sense the first stanza ends and the second stanza begins, there is a spillover of the meaning. There is a spillover of the momentum. Meaning and momentum spill over from the first stanza into the second stanza. We find the first stanza stepping into the second stanza. Through a keyhole, and saw my mother. There is no end stopping at the end of the first stanza. And saw my mother. Thank God, she has seen only her mother. In the drawing room. The drawing room is, at least during such occasions, territory which the daughter cannot enter. The girl is banned from entering the drawing room because a party is in progress. The girl's mother is a party animal. and saw my mother in the drawing room. The party is taking place obviously behind closed doors. And saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari. Sari, the ethnic wear of the Indian subcontinent, common in India, in Bangladesh, in Nepal, in Pakistan. You must understand that the sari is thousands of years old. There is evidence to show that it was worn even in the days of the Indus Valley civilization. The sari is mentioned in Kalidasa, in Bana, in Shilapadikaram. The sari is found in sculptures created several hundred years before Christ in the Indian subcontinent. But there are different ways of draping the sari. The sari is a long rectangular piece of fabric. Traditionally, it was made of silk or it was made of cotton. Silk sari. In the present poem, the sari is made of silk. Silk is, of course, the product that you get from the silkworm, from the cocoon, the pupa of the silkworm. And I think the two biggest producers of silk in the world are China and India. In her hibiscus silk sari, hibiscus, shoe flower, I think the Americans pronounce it as hibiscus, but I prefer hibiscus. The hibiscus is a hardy tropical shrub famous for its large showy flowers. The flowers could be yellow, could be pink, could even be brown, but I think the most archetypal hibiscus flower is a deep red flower. A deep red flower. And that, I think, is the flower that the poet seems to be having in mind. The most common hibiscus flower is a shocking red flower in her hibiscus silk sari. The girl looks through the keyhole and sees her mother wearing a shocking red, a deep red silk sari. Probably the girl has never seen her mother wear this sari. This sari is probably exclusively used by the woman for her parties. Hibiscus silk sari. What does the hibiscus stand for? The shocking red color and also the flower. They stand for joy. They stand for passion. They stand for celebration. And in India, the red hibiscus flower is said to be the favorite of Kali Mata, in which case it can be said to symbolize woman power. And saw my mother in the drawing room in her hibiscus silk sari. We now move to the next stanza. Her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. The daughter sees the mother not as a mother but as a woman taking part in a party, as a party animal. And the woman is found holding a glass of iced cola in her hand. The daughter becomes aware that her mother has slender fingers. Her fingers slender. Slender fingers are said to be very attractive. And I think that in Indian palmistry, Hasta Rekha Shastra, Slender fingers indicate a person who is very creative, who is very passionate, who is very full of life. Her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. Cola is a carbonated drink, usually brown, dark brown carbonated drink with fizz. It uses extracts from the cola nut, and that is why it's called cola. Iced cola. The glass contains cola, the glass also contains ice cubes. But here, I feel like disagreeing with the poet, disagreeing with the speaker, disagreeing with the daughter, with the girl. Probably the daughter's level of awareness regarding parties is very limited, and she mistakes the drink in the glass, the iced drink in the glass held in by the mother in her hand to be cola. It could very well be an alcoholic drink. Perhaps it is beer. Some beers are quite brown. They look like cola, especially strong beers. Or perhaps it is rum, or it is whiskey. It could even be whiskey. I understand that when an alcoholic drink is kept for a long time in a barrel, whatever be the drink, because alcohol is such a wonderful solvent, it becomes brown. So the girl sees the mother holding a glass of cola, iced cola, with her slender fingers. But I beg to disagree here, and I wish to point out that it might be out of her ignorance that the girl thinks that it is cola. It could very well be an alcoholic drink. Just as the daughter never knew until today that her mother was a party animal. It's quite possible that the daughter never knew till today that her mother was in the habit of drinking alcohol. We now move to the next stanza. I think it is the fourth stanza. And the speaker drops a bombshell. And I grew suddenly shy for never having seen her before. What could be more unexpected than this bombshell of a statement? The girl, living her entire life, short though it be, living her entire life of 8 years in the same house with her mother, declaring that she has not ever seen her before. And I grew suddenly shy. Shy means timid, uncomfortable, insecure, frightened. And I grew suddenly shy, embarrassed for never having seen her before. The girl declares that she has never before seen her mother. And you must understand that this is the mother with whom she has spent her entire life of 8 years in the same house. And I grew suddenly shy for never having seen her before. See how The poet positions the qualifiers, and I grew suddenly shy. The poet could very well have written, and I suddenly grew shy. The poet has deliberately positioned the qualifying word just before shy in order to subject the word shy, the term shy, to the full impact of the qualifier suddenly. And I grew suddenly shy for having, for never having seen her before. We now reach a very important stanza. I think it is the fifth stanza. It is the first stanza of the poem, which is more than 2 lines long. In fact, it is a rather long stanza. I knew her well, of course, serene undulation of blue mulmul, wrist serrated by thin gold bangle, gentle convexity of mole on upper right arm and high arched foot, better than I knew myself. The speaker here admits that she knew her mother very well, and she buttresses this statement with the details of her knowledge. I knew her well, of course. Which daughter does not know her mother? A daughter who has spent 8 years in the same house as her mother. How can she not know her mother? I knew her well, of course. Serene undulation of blue mulmul. Serene, very peaceful, very calm, very quiet, serene, spreading peace, spreading calmness, serene undulation. Undulation is the gentle rise and fall. Rising and falling in a very gentle manner. Serene undulation of blue mulmul. Mulmul or mul is a very expensive and a very fine kind of cotton. It is muslin. Sometimes mulmul and muslin are used interchangeably, but the fact is that mulmul is a kind of muslin which is very thin, which is very fine, and which is very expensive. Serene undulation of blue mulmul. Obviously, the mother almost always wears cotton saris, not just ordinary cotton saris, but mulmul saris. Soft, fine, thin, natural. And as she walks about, the daughter can feel, the daughter can see, the daughter can understand the serene undulation of the dress of the mother, the rise and fall. You must understand that in the early years, the child is, the baby, the child is frequently carried by the mother. The baby, the child sleeps in the same bed as the mother. And the baby, the child identifies herself closely with the mother as she understands the mother to be. And it is this understanding that is proved to be hollow in this poem. It is this identification that is shattered in this poem. serene undulation of blue mulmul, wrist serrated by thin gold bangle. Serrated means having a sharp edge, having an edge with many sharp points. There is a very close relationship between the daughter and the mother, between daughter and mother. And it's quite possible that the bangle has almost cut the daughter's body several times. And the daughter becomes aware that the bangle is quite sharp. It has a serrated edge. It has an edge with many sharp points. Wrist serrated by thin gold bangle, gentle convexity of mole on upper right arm. See how closely the daughter knows the mother. She is very familiar with the fact that there is a mole on the arm of the mother. She knows the specific point in the arm where the mole is. Gentle convexity of mole on the upper right arm and high arched foot. The foot of the mother has a high arch. The arch of the foot between the heel of the foot and the ball of the foot, there is an arch. But in some persons, the arch can be high. Between the heel of the foot and the front part of the foot, there can be a very high arch. It's a medical condition. Sometimes it is genetic. But I think that in the context of this poem, this woman must have developed a high arched foot as a result of using fancy footwear, unhealthy footwear. Of course, the poet does not clarify about it. The poet does not try to identify the reason for the high arched foot, but I think it is very reasonable to presume that in the context of the poem, this woman must have developed the medical condition of the high arched foot as a result of using unhealthy, fancy footwear better than I knew myself. That is the fact. The daughter knows the mother better than she knows herself. This stanza provides us information regarding the markers used by the daughter to fix the identity of the mother. Markers are things which indicate positions, places, routes, or, as in this case, identities. These are the markers which are used by the daughter to fix the identity of the mother. The blue mulmul, the gold bangle, the mole, the convex mole. Mole is, of course, a black spot or a black lump on the skin, the arched foot. But these markers today have proved to be utterly useless, and the identity of the mother as understood by the daughter all along has been shattered, has been blown sky high, and in the eyes of the daughter, in the perspectives of the daughter, the mother today acquires a new identity, not as a mother, but as a woman, but perhaps as a flirtatious woman, but as a party animal, and perhaps as a sexual being. I would like to pause for a moment and invite your attention to another even more famous poem of Arundhathi Subramaniam, Home. The word home is a very evocative word, a word which conjures up an aura of memories, nostalgia, love, acceptance. And I think there are hundreds, thousands of poems in almost all the languages of the world about home and what it means to the speaker. In fact, I myself have written quite a few poems about my ancestral home. This being so, when I read Arundhati Subramaniam's Home for the first time, I was a bit taken aback. I think this is how the poem begins. Give me a home which isn't mine. Give me a home which isn't mine. The speaker asks for a home which is not her home, starkly highlighting the intense alienation that the speaker feels in her own home. I think we can make an attempt to relate home of Arundhati Subramaniam to the poem under consideration. Home is spoken by a person who is completely alienated, who feels out of place in her own home. But we can state that the process of the alienation, the process of alienation undergone by the speaker in home could very well have begun the night described in the present poem, the night when the 8-year-old girl peeps through the keyhole into the drawing room and observes her mother as a party animal and starts realizing that the apparent state of affairs is seldom the real state of affairs, that her mother is not what she appears to be, and by extension, her home is also not what it appears to be. The next answer is rather short but very interesting. It comprises just, let me see, yes, 3 lines. And I knew her voice like running water, ice cubes in cola. The speaker tries to emphasize the fact that she knew her mother extremely well, not merely the geography of her mother. In fact, the poet uses the word geography a little later in the poem. Not merely the geography of the mother, but also the acoustics. She was very familiar with the voice of the mother. And I knew her voice like running water. Running water is water that is brought through pipes into buildings. And a city-bred child is extremely familiar with running water. Perhaps there is nothing more familiar than running water to a city-bred child. And here the speaker says that she was as familiar with the voice of her mother as she was with running water. Running water means water that is available from a tap. You open the tap and the water comes out. Only that in certain cities in India like Chennai, my mother's hometown, you open the tap and the water does not come out. That is by the way. I knew her voice like running water. Is there a suggestion that the mother was a very talkative person, a very garrulous woman. Daughters often feel that mothers talk too much, give too many instructions. Is there a subtext to that effect here? And I knew her voice like running water. Ice cubes in cola. How do you explain this? Took me some time to find an explanation for this. It appears complex to begin with, but it is not at all complex when you analyze and evaluate the passage. I knew her voice like running water. The girl is familiar with the mother's voice as she is familiar with running water. Ice cubes in cola. How do you explain this? What have ice cubes in cola to do with running water? And both of them to do with the voice of the mother. I will put forward an explanation. If you have a better explanation, please come up with it. The daughter is as familiar with the voice of the mother as she is with running water. Ice cubes in cola. Ice cubes are used to bring down the temperature of drinks. And in this case, it is cola. What is an ice cube? It's a cube. It is just water. Ice cubes are frozen water. First you have running water, and now you have ice cubes. What is the poet trying to suggest? The mother that she knew as a child was running water. But the mother that she sees through the keyhole is a very different person, is a woman rather than a mother. But she is still the same person. It is as if the running water has now been converted into ice cubes. The difference between the first person and the second person, the mother and the woman, the mother and the party animal, the mother and the sexual being, is exactly the difference between running water and ice cubes in cola. Again, I would like to point out that it is probably out of ignorance that the child says that the mother was drinking cola. She was very probably drinking an alcoholic drink, and the child was unaware of it. Cola is dark brown. Cola is a carbonated drink whose base is the extract from the cola nut. And the daughter probably knows only of cola. But there are other drinks, stronger drinks, more exciting drinks, and they are all alcoholic. And very probably the mother was consuming some dark brown alcoholic drink. I would now like to say something about narratives and counter narratives. Put very simply, a narrative is whatever is narrated. A narrative is anything which is spoken or written. A spoken or written account of anything forms a narrative. But there is more to it than meets the eye, because a narrative is always a way of understanding and presenting a series of events or issues. A narrative has perspectives, has ideologies underpinning it. It is the way in which you comprehend, evaluate, and present a series of events or issues. A counter narrative is a narrative which goes against another narrative. A counter narrative is an alternative narrative. A counter narrative presents the same events, the same issues presented by the narrative in a very different manner. The counter narrative goes against the narrative, contradicts the narrative, demolishes the perspectives and ideologies underpinning the narrative. Usually, we meet with the narrative and then we meet with the counter narrative which tries to overpower and overthrow the narrative. But in this poem, the poet very remarkably starts with a counter narrative and then she moves to the narrative and then she returns to the counter narrative. Thus, the narrative is sandwiched between the two parts of the counter narrative. This is nothing short of brilliant. And as a result, the narrative is overwhelmed and overpowered and overcome and overshadowed by the counter narrative. We now meet with a 4-line stanza. But through the keyhole at the grown-up party, she was no longer geography. A 4-line stanza which is pregnant with semantic significance. But through the keyhole at the grown-up party, party in which only adults can participate, party which is territory into which children cannot enter, the speaker cannot enter. But through the keyhole at the grown-up party, she was no longer geography. Geography is a science that deals with the physical features of the earth and the atmosphere and how it impacts people. The contrast, I think, is between geography and landscape. As a mother, she was geography. The daughter was very familiar with the geography of the mother. But as a party animal, she becomes landscape. Landscape is again the physical features of the land. The mountains, the rivers, the deserts, the trees. What is the difference between geography and landscape? More or less the same, but vitally different from each other. Geography is more scientific. Landscape is more artistic. Geography does not stir the emotions. Landscape appeals to the emotions. Geography has very little aesthetic aspect. Landscape has a huge content of aesthetic aspect. A landscape has to appeal to you. It has to stir your emotions. It has to overwhelm you. It has to overpower you emotionally. It has to be beautiful. It has to be aesthetically appealing. The same thing. Geography deals with the physical features of the land. The landscape also deals with the physical features of the land. But see the dramatic difference between geography and landscape. This is the difference between the speaker's mother as mother and his party animal. Let us take a look at the next stanza. She seemed to know how to incline her neck, just when to sip her swirly drink, and she understood the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails and words like emergency. Here we get a picture of the mother as a perfect party animal. She seemed to know how to incline her neck, how to bend her neck, how to position her neck in a sloping way. You usually incline your neck to listen intently to something said by somebody else in a very low voice, or perhaps to whisper something into somebody's ear. A perfect party animal. She seemed to know how to incline her neck, just when to sip her swirly drink. Swirly is moving in a swirling way, moving in a twisting pattern, moving in a spiraling pattern, not just a circular pattern, but a spiraling pattern. Just when to sip her swirly drink, and she understood the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. Men and women having a wonderful time in the party. Baritone is a male, adult male singing voice. I think it is between tenor and bass. Adult male singing voice between, it's a deep voice, between tenor and bass. And lacquered nails. Nails which are covered with lacquer. Lacquer and polish, not much of a difference. I think lacquer is solvent based, lacquer is thicker, lacquer is more expensive than polish. And she understood the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. I think the men, at least some men in the party have started singing baritone voices, adult male singing voices. And some of the women have started clapping lacquered nails. Men and women enjoying themselves. They are painting the town red. And the girl sees through the keyhole her mother perfectly at home in this world of party animals. And words like emergency. Emergency with a capitalized initial letter. The E is capitalized. This must be a reference, this is a reference to the emergency declared by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. I think it was in 1975 to 1977, some 21 months. June 1975, if I remember correctly, to March 1977, when in the general elections the Congress was routed and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi lost power. So, what is the speaker trying to put across? The mother who used to talk all the time, who was a very talkative woman, a garrulous woman, at least that was what the daughter understood her to be, now speaking in a very sophisticated manner, contributing to the conversation in the party, proving herself to be a brilliant conversationalist, speaking about things like emergency, the political scenario. The daughter never knew that her mother was so much aware of cutting edge developments in politics that she could speak in such a sophisticated manner, that she could contribute so effectively to a party conversation, that she could be such a spectacular party animal. I feel like reading the stanza again. She seemed to know how to incline her neck, just when to sip her swirly drink, and she understood the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails, and words like emergency. What a beautiful stanza. I would like to bring into conjunction with the present poem Nazim Ezekiel's poem At the Party. Both deal with the world of glittering parties. Both deal with glittering Bombay parties. Because in those days, Mumbai was still known as Bombay. But when landscape becomes woman, attempts to look at the party from the perspective of the outsider, from the perspective of the person who is banned from taking part in the party, at the party, looks at the party through the eyes of an avid party goer who thoroughly enjoys himself and who is completely at home in the party. Secondly, while the Arundhathi Subramaniam poem looks at the party through the eyes of a woman, or more exactly, a girl, the Nazim Ezekiel poem looks at the party through the eyes of a man. In fact, at one point in the poem, the speaker says that the hero of the poem scrutinizes the women for the kill. Thus, the Arundhathi Subramaniam poem and the Nazim Ezekiel poem invite comparison as well as contrast with each other. The fourth last stanza is a gem of a stanza, is a solitaire of a stanza. Just one line. I could have watched her all night. Stop. Just 7 words. Let me see. Yes, 7 words. I could have watched her all night. The speaker feels that the experience of looking through the keyhole at her mother, being the star of an all-night party, was something like watching Netflix or Amazon Prime, only that there was no Netflix, no Amazon Prime at the time. I could have watched her all night. The girl could have spent the whole night binge watching her mother. There has already been developed in the poem a contrast between geography and landscape. The whole night could have been spent by the girl looking at the landscape, appreciating the beauty of the landscape, submitting to the aesthetic appeal of the landscape. I could have watched her all night. She could have spent the whole night binge watching. Not Netflix, not Amazon Prime, but her own mother. Why has the poet created this very, very powerful gem of a stanza, solitaire of a stanza, which stands out in the poem? There is space above the line, there is space below the line. There are a number of reasons. First of all, this is a very important node in the thematic trajectory of the poem. And the poet wants to, to draw as much attention as possible to this node. Secondly, the line conveys something which can be called the secret power of the poem. I could have watched her all night. If this line had not been there, the poem would not be what it is now. The strength of the poem, the power of the poem rests on this one line. How the little girl could have spent the whole night looking through the keyhole, binge watching her mother. Thirdly, this idea, this concept, this thematic point is rather unrelated to what comes before it and rather unrelated to what comes after it. What precedes it and what succeeds it does not have much of a relation to it. Thus, the poet places a gem in the poem. It is like a diamond which is embedded in a jewel all alone, drawing all the possible focus, drawing all the possible attention to itself. I could have watched her all night. There is the subtext that the girl did not actually watch her mother all night. I could have watched. If she had actually watched her mother the whole night, she would not have said this. I could have watched her all night. Why did she stop watching her mother? Number of reasons. It's a tremendous strain to keep looking through a small keyhole the whole night. Also, the girl would have been terrified at the consequences of having been discovered, of being discovered by her mother, peeping through the keyhole, looking at her mother when the mother does not want to be looked at. Thus we have a very powerful, carefully crafted fourth last stanza. I could have watched her all night. The last three stanzas of the poem present a series of generalizations, the great lessons that the girl learns as a result of her unforgettable experience, an experience which is something of a turning point in her life, an experience which makes her grow older by several years, even several decades, in a single night. The first of these is that, I shall read the stanza, and that's how I discovered that keyholes always reveal more than doorways. If you want to know what is really taking place, don't look through the doorway. Look through the keyhole, peep through the keyhole. And that's how I discovered that keyholes always reveal more than doorways. This is something I always tell my students. The apparent state of affairs is never the real state of affairs. And if you want to know the apparent state of affairs, look through the doorway. If you want to know the real state of affairs, peep through the keyhole. that a chink in the wall is all you need to tumble into a parallel universe. Chink means small hole, narrow hole. You have the idiom, chink in the armor. That a chink in the wall is all you need to tumble, to fall into a parallel universe, a universe which exists side by side with the accepted universe. Here you have two universes existing, coexisting side by side, coexisting in a parallel manner without interacting with each other. The first is the universe in which the child's mother, the girl's mother, is a mother. The second is the universe in which the girl's mother is a woman, is a party goer, is a party animal, perhaps a flirtatious party animal, a star of all-night glittering all-night parties, a woman who enjoys the company of men, a woman who earns the admiration of men, and perhaps a woman with whom all men cannot but fall in love with. By looking through the keyhole, by peeping through the keyhole, the girl has fallen rather accidentally, rather unexpectedly from the conventional universe, from the accepted universe into the parallel universe. And you must remember that I think the poet does not use the word peep, she uses the word look, because the speaker does not want to give the suggestion that she is doing something which should not be done, or doing something which is not ethical, or doing something which is not justifiable morally. Because it is the mother who is doing things which are not justifiable, not ethical, not acceptable morally, because all along the mother has given the picture that she is a mother, and perhaps given the picture that she is a mother. She's only a mother. She's a mother alone. She's only a mother and nothing else. And now she, in reality, is not what she pretends to be, appears to be. Let us look closely at the last line of the poem, which is also the last stanza of the poem. Just 4 words, that mothers are women. This is the great takeaway of the poem, the great discovery that the girl makes that night, the great lesson that the girl learns that night, and the great lesson that we as readers learn when we complete reading the poem, that mothers are women. Most of us, almost all of us, to begin with, come to believe that mothers are mothers and nothing more. But the fact is that mothers were once girls. Mothers are now not just mothers but also women. But very deftly, very cleverly, very astutely, most mothers hide this great truth from their children until the day comes or the night comes when the child peeps through the keyhole and learns the devastating truth that mothers are women. The poem is organized in 12 stanzas. The stanzas are of varying lengths. Some stanzas are short. For example, the last stanza consists of just 1 line. Some stanzas are relatively long. The 8th stanza consists of 7 lines. Similarly, the poet very deftly, very skillfully makes use of the technique of varying linear length. The second stanza consists of just three words. The second line consists of just three words, while the third line consists of 8 words. Some lines are short, some lines are relatively long. The diction is everyday, is simple, conversational. In fact, the entire tone of the poem is conversational. You must remember that the speaker is a girl of 8, and the diction is what very much suits, very much becomes a girl of 8, a city-bred girl of 8. We have already discussed the title of the poem in some detail. I would like to observe here that the poem has a very carefully chosen, a very carefully crafted, a very appropriate title. The poem is a free verse poem. It does not have a proper rhyme scheme. The stanzaic pattern is irregular. The lines are of varying lengths. The poet does not seek the support of meter in the poem. The poet refuses to capitalize the initial letter of the initial word of each line unless demanded by the occasion. The poem is a brilliant exemplification of verse libre or free verse. The language of signs is literal language. The language of literature is figurative language. Of all the figures of speech, perhaps the most important is the metaphor. The metaphor is a comparison which is implicit, a comparison which refuses to admit that it is a comparison. When something is described in terms of something else, you have a metaphor. In the present poem, the title itself uses a very appropriate and a very powerful metaphor. When landscape becomes woman. The girl looks through the keyhole. She sees a landscape. The landscape is so appealing. It's not a geography, it's a landscape. It's not a geography. It's a landscape. And the landscape is so appealing and so interesting that she could have spent the entire night looking at it. But the landscape is a woman. The landscape is the observer's own mother. When landscape becomes woman, please note that the poet does not say when woman becomes landscape. I think that is exactly what happens. The girl of 8 peeps through the keyhole and sees her mother, a woman, and the woman is a landscape to her eyes. But the poet refuses to say that. Instead, the poet says, when landscape becomes woman. The emphasis is on landscape. The stress is on landscape. What the girl sees through the keyhole is a landscape. A beautiful landscape, an interesting landscape, a captivating landscape. But the landscape happens to be a woman. The landscape happens to be the observer's own mother. In stanza 7, the poet says, I quote, but through the keyhole at the grown-up party, she was no longer geography, unquote. Here we find a metaphor as appropriate as powerful as the first one. The mother metaphorizes geography, landscape and geography, seemingly not very different from each other, but actually quite different. The mother is metaphorized as geography, as an academic subject, as a science, as something precise, as something demanding, as something boring, as something which puts you off, even as something, and even as something which you almost hate. The point is that while the mother is geography, the same person, when she becomes a woman, she becomes landscape. In stanza 8, we have yet another striking metaphor. She understood the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. The speaker convinces us that a particular language was spoken in the party, and that language was understood by the speaker's mother, who is now nothing more than a woman. The subtext being that it was beyond the comprehension of the speaker, the little girl peeping through the keyhole. And what language was it? The language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. Baritone, I think I've already explained it. It's a male singing voice, an adult male singing voice, between tenor and bass. And lacquered nails, nails covered with lacquer. Lacquer is something like polish, but thicker than polish and more long lasting than polish. This particular language is not created using words, using sounds, but it consists of baritone voices, singing men, men who were singing, and women who were clapping their hands. They were conveying something, and what was being conveyed was being understood. In fact, they were speaking, they were using a language. And just as a language like English consists of sounds, this particular language consisted of baritone voices and lacquered nails, singing men and clapping women. In contrast to the metaphor, the simile is a figure of speech in which the comparison that is established between two things is explicit. While in the metaphor the comparison is implicit, in the simile the comparison is clearly stated. We do have a very good simile in the poem. I think it is in stanza 6. Let me see. Yes, stanza 6, the sixth stanza. And I knew her voice like running water. And I knew her voice like running water. What a fantastic simile. The girl says, the daughter says that she was familiar with the voice of the mother as she was with running water. And perhaps there is nothing more familiar to a city-bred child than running water. Running water is water that is supplied into a building through pipes. And as I said, as I've already observed, there is also perhaps a suggestion that the mother was a very talkative woman, that she was a very garrulous woman, like running water, talking all the time. Once you open the tap, the water keeps flowing out. And I knew her voice, like running water. A fantastic simile, a very appropriate simile. In enjambment, meaning and momentum are carried forward beyond the end of a line or beyond the end of a stanza. The preceding line steps into the succeeding line, or the preceding stanza steps into the succeeding stanza. In this particular poem, the poet repeatedly makes use of enjambment. For example, in stanza 1, I was 8 when I looked through a keyhole. Looked through. Meaning and momentum flow from the first line into the second line. Similarly, in stanza 4, and I grew suddenly shy for never having seen her before. Suddenly shy for. Similarly, in stanza 6, and I knew her voice like running water. I knew her voice, and I knew her voice like running water. Or further down, and that's how I discovered that keyholes always reveal more. Discovered that keyholes always reveal more than doorways, more than. Or even before that, I think it is stanza 7, if I am not wrong. Towards the end of stanza 7, the language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. The language of baritone voices and lacquered nails. The poet makes use of some very potent symbols in the poem. First of all, we have the keyhole. The keyhole is a symbol of secrecy. The keyhole stands for activities behind closed doors, not only behind closed doors, but revelation of such activities. It is a symbol not merely of secrecy, but of secrecy revealed. It is a symbol of the revelation of the activities behind closed doors. I think it is in stanza 2 that we have the hibiscus silk sari. Hibiscus, as I've already explained, is a tropical plant with large, showy flowers. The typical hibiscus flower is deep red, but it can also be orange, it can also be yellow, it can also be pink. The hibiscus is a symbol of joy, of celebration, of passion. And in the Indian context, because the hibiscus flower is beloved of Kali Mata, it can symbolize woman power. Is the poet trying to suggest that the woman at the center of the party, the mother who is being looked at through the keyhole by the daughter, was so much admired by the men in the party that she was almost a goddess. Further down in the poem, we have ice cubes in cola. Ice cubes in cola, I think, can be seen, can be read as a symbol of the party itself. That's how the perfect party should be. Just as the ice cubes merge into the cola, melt into the cola, become one with the cola, the participants in the party have to forget their individual identities and merge themselves into the spirit of the party, integrate themselves into the party itself in such a manner that they cease to exist as individuals and become just parts of the glittering, brilliant, spectacular party. Coke itself is a symbol. Coke is Coca-Cola, the most popular beverage in the world, perhaps after water. Coca-Cola is a soft drink produced by the Coca-Cola Company, the multinational corporation with operations in more than 200 countries. Coke stands for relaxation, for enjoyment, for celebration, for joy, and above all, for Western culture. Western culture. The girl looking through the keyhole was scandalized because she did not know earlier that her mother was a very westernized woman. And this element of Western culture in the character of the mother, now party animal, is indicated by the Coke that she so stylishly drinks. In this Arundhathi Subramaniam poem, we meet with a series of striking images. We have images from everyday life, especially city life. We have images from nature, from natural life. We have images from current affairs. We have images from the world of jewelry. We have images from the world of fashion. The striking images contribute significantly to the strength of the poem. Alliteration is the repetition of consonantal sounds in close succession in adjacent words or in words which are positioned near one another. In the present poem, the poet repeatedly makes use of alliteration. Take, for example, line 4 of the poem. Line 4. In her hibiscus silk sari. In her hibiscus silk sari. Or take line 5 and line 6. Her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. Her fingers slender around a glass of iced cola. I would like to wrap up the discussion by working out a comparison between the present poem and the 1865 novel of Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, frequently shortened as Alice in Wonderland. In Alice in Wonderland, Alice falls into a rabbit hole and through the rabbit hole enters a fantasy world, a wonderland. In the Arundhathi Subramaniam poem, the girl looks through a keyhole to see a wonderland. A fundamental difference between the two is that while Alice actually enters the wonderland, becomes part of the wonderland, and interacts with the characters in the wonderland, the girl in the Arundhati Subramaniam poem is only able to see the wonderland. She is not able to enter the wonderland. In fact, she is banned from entering the wonderland.